Welcome, Gearheads. Welcome to your Sunday night with Speed City. We got an exciting show tonight. Racing is back in action with Indycar and NASCAR. We're going to talk a lot about Formula One testing. We have a couple of interviews. Bob Varsha did a great interview with the author of the Sir Lewis book about Lewis Hamilton, Michael E. Sawyer. And we caught up with Simon Patterson, who's in the Moto GP paddock. We had to get up at a different time zone for him, but we got all of that, and we're going to start with Formula One testing. This is Jon Massengale, Jonathan Green, and Bob Varsha with me. I'll start with you, Jonathan. F1 testing. What's your quick overview? We'll go through all the teams later.
My quick overview is there isn't one team. You know, a couple of years. You know, last year and the year before it was McLaren. Oh, woe is us, and and Mercedes. Oh, woe is us. The year before, none of the teams looked that way. Predictably, Sauber haven't come forward a great deal. Haas didn't look great, but the outstanding one that wasn't obvious going into testing was Williams.
Yeah.
No question. Really, really pleased for Carlos Sainz and really, really pleased for Albon and for the whole team. They've got a brand new title sponsor. Vowles wouldn't give the number away, but he said it's up there.
Significant.
And I know Williams' budgets have never been significant. They're very, Bar, Maldonado, and a little bit of a backhanded Venezuelan money now and again. They've never really had major sponsors since Rothmans, to be honest.
Bob Varsha, I'm so excited about this season because we have all the players in different teams and all the rookies involved, and Lewis Hamilton coming to Ferrari. I mean, it's just magic. But what did you think of testing?
Well, this is the time of year where I always throw out my caveat. Testing tells us nothing. Everybody's got various agendas, shall we say. We don't know legitimately what tire they were using, with how much fuel load and what engine setting and all that kind of thing. Red Bull did not look great. Were they sandbagging? We won't know until Melbourne coming up shortly. Sad to see Haas kind of floundering around in the back there, but not far off the pace. And I agree completely with what Jonathan just said, that it was great. For the first time in a long time, everybody showed up. Everybody was buttoned up, cars ready, drivers are ready.
Yeah.
Off we go. Very little in the way of bent race cars or red flags. In fact, the biggest problems were stuff they had no control over. They had a power outage on day one. They had
rain.
A wet racetrack on day 2 or 3. Rain in Bahrain. Go figure.
Go figure. Yeah.
So everybody's working hard, and I'm really looking forward to Melbourne now.
Hey, Jonathan, I think what you were talking about, how all these teams, everybody's buttoned up, everybody's ready. There is no Manor or Marussia or whatever right now. And this is the Liberty Media influence with the teams being franchises now, I think.
I do think so, too. I also think that the ladder is kind of coming to fruition because look at you mentioned no big pranks. Well, so often when young guys get into Formula One and this is their shot, they're quite, there's usually, I think Lawson had a half spin or something. Really. There was really nothing that you would say, oh, gosh, so-and-so Williams hit the wall, they won't be in Australia with 2 cars type thing. But because they all, Antonelli, everybody, Behrman, perform very well and competitively. So we've got a real changing of the guard. I think that's exciting. Like I said, I'll maintain what I said the first weekend I got back from New Zealand. I'm going to be watching the inter-team battle.
Yes.
That, to me, I don't care who wins the constructors. It'll be far more interesting going, what happened between Stroll and Alonso today, and what happened between Ferrari, the 2 Ferrari drivers today?
My favorite of all of those is, just personally, it's going to be Liam Lawson and Max Verstappen.
Gosh, yes.
And by the way, Liam Lawson's teammate had a spin too.
There you go.
Verstappen did too. If I'm not mistaken, Bob, do you remember that? Didn't Verstappen have a spin during testing also?
Yeah, the half spin, I think.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
But,
I agree with Bob.
Again, now's the time to have them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were you going to say? You agree with Bob?
Yeah, I agree with Bob about Red Bull not being overly impressive, but it's hard to tell. I think if we are looking at a move forward from last year, you've got to think that McLaren are going to be favourites. You've got to think that Ferrari, only 14 points behind, are going to be favourites. And then Red Bull will do what Red Bull does very well, especially in the hands of Max Verstappen. And it will be interesting to see how close Lawson can get to him in comparison, because that will bring Red Bull truly into the constructors' fight against those other two teams I mentioned, and then throw Mercedes, in there as well, and you're laughing. It's going to be fun.
By the way, we're keeping an eye on the NASCAR race.
Yeah.
And yes, we're a little disappointed we're not out at COTA, but we just got
Not invited.
well, we're just not involved in NASCAR, so yeah.
I can say boogity, boogity, boogity.
Don't say it like that, man. Maybe
Hand on heart.
Boogity, boogity, boogity.
What do we got? 26? 26 laps to go. So yeah.
I watched the whole St. Pete IndyCar race.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then took a break and came back, and I missed the whole pre-race in Austin.
Good.
Basically got there just as they were pairing up to take off on lap 1, and of course, turn 1 crash. But I swear it took me 7-8 laps before I figured out that they weren't running the whole track. They'd taken a mile out of the track. And
Yeah, 1.2.
You're screaming at the TV, hey, man, there's a penalty there. He's cut the course.
You can't turn there.
I don't recognize that.
I'd like to see. I heard your commentary on that one.
I heard Larry Mack saying, watch out for track limits. And then I watched those opening laps, and
they were
spent
everywhere.
more time off the track than on.
I know.
mean,
they
were
go
all
halfway
over
to
the place.
Bastrop and across the blooming river.
Well, that is hilarious. That you were watching it and didn't realize why they were. Sorry.
There you go.
Sorry, Casey. I didn't realize would have been
should have
hilarious to watch your face when they turned left at turn 6.
They should have the racetrack equivalent of a swear jar. You know, if you go off track, you have to put $1 in the jar. And man, that would be a race purse right there.
There you go.
As much time as these guys spend.
I have to say, the one thing that I'm taking, I'm a big Shane Van Gisbergen fan because I've obviously followed his career. He's a Kiwi, he's kicking butt. And he also drives for Trackhouse, and I know Justin pretty well, having done Trans Am with him. And but the guy I want to shout out though is making a name for himself. He won the Xfinity last night. And he got hit actually in that opening salvo, but the Red Bull sponsored Connor Zillage.
Yeah.
Zillage.
Yeah.
Zillage. I've known him since he was
Zillage.
15. He got pole position at his first race in Trans Am, and we all went, uh-oh. He was also a world kart champion, along with Brent Cruz, who's currently still in Trans Am and who's on his way next. But this is the first real graduate that has got to
recent Trans Am history.
and is so young. I mean, it's his debut today in Cup Series. He's 18.
He's 18 years old.
And he belongs,
And
totally.
he had a heavy crash. He got involved with, I can't remember who, but he got turned sideways. And
I think he got involved in that Chase Briscoe incident at the top, on the first corner.
he did. And he fell well back. And then he started to do what he did yesterday when he won the Xfinity race. He went to the back of the pack, passed everybody, and won the race.
Amazing.
Today, he went to the back in that turn 1 schmozzle, came forward, and I think he was running just outside the top 10 when he crashed.
Hey, Greeny.
Not his own fault.
Sorry, Bob. You said Van Gisbergen.
Okay.
You said, I don't think he's going to win. And he was down in 10th when we got here.
Oh,
He's up to second.
He's second.
I told you,
25 to go.
anybody
That's
in
my
the-
boy.
Anybody in the top 10 in a NASCAR race has got a shot.
I have to admit, the reason why I'm a bit of a fanboy is that he is not a fanboy, but his best man at his wedding from New Zealand, is my co-commentator in New Zealand. And just for fun,
I was going to. You better not say what you were about to say.
well, and grins. He literally watched every race we did, and then would send us comments to
While you're on air, right?
while we're on air to say during the race, and he'd give us a bonus point if we got it in.
Yeah.
Like I had to say something like egregious
that's
rumble
right.
strips,
A phrase, that's funny.
and wibbly wobbly. But so I
All
think
your
that's great
Antipodean
fun.
Boys did well.
Hey,
Yeah.
where's Kyle Larson? Is he?
He lost a wheel.
Oh, well,
Lost a wheel mid stage
So
2.
they're
Lost
trying to
that
level
right
the
front.
field with him. He can beat him with 3 wheels.
Yeah.
He's not in the top 20 or so right now. But anyway, we're going to be keeping
well
an eye
back.
on that. We got about 24 laps.
By the way, I thought it was pretty funny. McLaughlin, after getting pole, also said something really weird, like he'd been bet to say it. And I was
did
like,
he? Oh, yeah.
And I was like, it wonder if Shay's put a call in.
Isn't that like Verstappen, simply lovely?
Oh,
We
simply
always thought
lovely.
it
Yeah,
was
we'll never
some-
get the true story there.
Yeah,
But
there's something cryptic about that.
yeah.
All right, well, let's get a first break in real quick. And when we come back, we're going to do a quick rundown of team by team in F1 testing. And then we're going to get into IndyCar. Back after these messages. All right, checking in on the YouTubers. Ha! Everybody's watching NASCAR. Kevin Kelly's here. There's a handful of folks watching, but nobody's talking. Come on, people, chat in. We got to see what you're talking about here. Kevin Kelly says he hopes Haas was sandbagging. Yeah, man, it's like Bob said. It's just testing. Everybody is just, this. Kevin Kelly knows it better than me. Is that it's just testing. They're all figuring this stuff out. But welcome, new viewers, if you're out there lurking. We just have a short break here. And like I said, we're going to get in team by team and talk about it. I have a list of the headline lap times. In other words, everybody's, whatever they did to get lap times. And I'll let you guys guess who had the fastest lap if you don't already know it.
Wasn't it?
Fastest lap of what?
Of the 3
Testing,
days.
F1 testing, yeah.
Wasn't it Sainz?
It was. It was, you're right.
Yeah. Everybody knows that.
Here we go.
And that's what Michael Sawyer caught me out on, because I was talking to him at the end of day 2.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought Lewis had gone quick.
I'm Liam Lawson, and you're listening to Speed City.
Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
That little clip from Liam Lawson, that wasn't in our last interview we did with him last year. That was a few years ago, wasn't it? We've been talking to Liam for, I don't know, what, 5 years plus?
Yep.
Something like that. All right, we're going to talk a little F1 testing. And I used an article that I saw on therace.com, the-race, and the way that everybody did their top 10, right, after testing, because that's what you do. We're not going to do that because I agree with what Bob said. It doesn't really matter. I like the one that you linked, Jonathan, Racing News 65, and theirs was Red Bull is in trouble, big trouble.
I know.
I was laughing. I was like, come on, guys. It's clickbait. I'm sure they tweeted that too. But
it's when I put that
Absolutely.
in the running order, I was like, we don't often use this website, and I know that it's what I would call New York Post headlines.
Yeah.
Which is
tabloid stuff.
Tabloid stuff, which is like, it's like they said, Ford, we're going to buy a team. Ford to buy F1 team. That was one of their headlines. And I was like, whoa, went straight to that.
Guys,
I was like,
come on.
no, they were
there's a
looking
few
at
of
Lindsey Vaughn is going to be hired by Mercedes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the way the race did it is they didn't say this is what's going to happen in the rest of the year. They just said this is how we ranked their testing, which I really like the way they did that. And they put having Sauber having the worst testing. And the headline from that was, the baseline was not amazing. We definitely have certain struggles. And that's from Nico Hulkenberg. And, to me, testing, Bob, you probably have, well, Jonathan, you both guys have tons of time in the F1 paddocks. To me, you can learn as much from looking at body language and drivers' comments and things and their tone as you can about anything else. And when I hear stuff like that from a driver saying, we certainly have we definitely have certain struggles, I think there's, I think that's something to those things.
Yeah, right from the get-go, Hulkenberg was looking off, when he was not in the car and having deep discussions with the team, et cetera, et cetera. And so Sauber have got, as well as Haas, have got some work to do.
And they had the slowest of all the fastest lap times. They had the slowest.
Yeah.
Sauber did. Next on their list was Aston Martin. They only did 306 laps, the second least. And Stroll, of course, got 6. That's probably why, because Stroll only got 35 laps. Did we ever hear what happened to Stroll? Did you hear, Bob?
No.
He had an illness at one point.
But I did notice, I'm looking at the Autosport results. Ollie Behrman in the Haas had the slowest lap at 132.361, which was, I don't know how far off the pace.
Yeah.
Pretty far.
Yeah.
Off of 129.346. So that's 3 seconds.
Well, and
The way you look at it.
they rank Haas next, and I'll get to them. And they were 7th fastest with their fastest lap, Aston Martin was. But a quote from Alonso, he said, I think things will look a lot like last season, which wasn't good.
Which
really.
is kind of what we predicted,
Right.
given the
26
kind of weird year we're in. You're not.
Newey coming and
Yeah, I mean, I watched quite a lot of the technical pieces, and they were almost sort of, wolf in sheep's clothing, i.e., there's a lot of bodywork changes, but there's not a lot of changes necessarily underneath. Besides push rod and pull rod suspension, for guys changing cars that way, which really doesn't. It depends on the car, and you can adjust either way. There isn't an advantage per se.
Yeah.
It's hard to predict, but I don't expect the sort of upgrades we've had in the past to be. I think it'll be a more stable year. I think, like I said, I'll be watching the inter-team battle, but I also will be watching the management battle, because the truth is, this is going to be a year that if you let Piastri and you let Norris fight each other, and you let Lewis and you let Leclerc fight each other, and put no team orders in, which is what Red Bull have already basically stated, and so too have Alpine and a few other teams. It depends on your attitude. Ron Dennis was well known for letting his drivers do the business, and then taking favourites when it was needed to support the guy leading the championship. And I'm a fan of that. Otherwise, you can't take on a racing driver and go, great to have you on board, but we don't want you to win.
Yeah. It's like, you're here and you're going to sit over in that seat over there, and you're going to stay back behind.
Ferrari have famously done for years with Massa and Irvine and many, many others. I just think the management of, we questioned Zach Brown a little bit, and I think he got burned a little bit last year when he didn't get Piastri to support Norris perhaps more earlier in the season. So what I'm going to be watching for is it going to be hell bent for leather, two Ferraris hitting each other or two Mercedes hitting each other, or is it going to be no, George Russell is the team leader, and Antonelli, get as many points as you can.
Yeah. All right, next on the list was Haas.
Well, it's like the old joke. If they hit each other, they'll only do it once.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Haas, the quote there, Ayo Komatsu was asked, where are you in the midfield? He said, we're in the ballpark. We just don't know where.
Yeah.
Obviously too certain. And you talk about body work. Behrman
They've got
lost
so
body
many
work.
new people.
Yeah. Up and down, not just Ayo and drivers.
Right.
Yeah,
they definitely need to stiffen up that body work. They said it was just a broken fastener. But, and the situation at Haas has to be a little confusing. You got new engineers and new people in new positions, and it's probably pretty remarkable they got the car out there in one piece on the track to go testing, and I expect they're going to improve pretty quickly. Most of the talk seems to be about Aston Martin. Will they join the big four up front and make it a big five? And based on testing, I think we have to say that's not looking likely unless something important happens.
Yeah. Next on their list of having a good testing was Racing Bulls. And the quote that I wrote down from that was Laurent Mecchi saying, I mean, he didn't really say a whole lot. He just says that he believes they're in the fight. And I think they had, based on this ranking too, I would agree with, they had a better testing than those teams below them. So they're in the fight. Next, they put Alpine. And that, to me, Alpine and Williams, they put them back to back here. I think they got a good shot at having a really good year. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm really interested in Alpine in that they've got a really good driver lineup, and then they've got that jeopardy, of course, of having the possibility of putting Colapinto in the run.
Yeah.
And just take your empathy hat off for a second and look at it from Flavio's point of view. I listened to a podcast the other day where he was interviewed, and he said, there is only one number one driver, and that you cannot have. They were talking about 2007 and 2008 with Hamilton and Alonso, and of course he manages Alonso, and he basically said, it's wrong to do it that way because it can never work. You have to be clear with your drivers, and you have to be like, this is your role. And it can go other ways, and just by sheer, one guy breaks down, the other doesn't, and it can change. But I just thought it was interesting, and I'll be interested to see how Flavio, now back in the hot seat, as it were, performs because he is brutal. He's classic F1. You know, he's out of the mold.
He's old
He'll
school.
fire everybody.
He's old and old school.
Yeah, and if he's been given the mantle to run the team and bring Alpine back, they say they're not selling it. They've got a bunch of Hollywood investors and sportsmen. This is a big season for them to finish in the. If they can finish 5th or 6th or 7th, that'll be job done. Well done.
Yeah.
And I could still see Colapinto coming into play.
And next on that list, like I said, is Williams. They set the fastest lap time of the second day of running there. So
yeah, that really stood out to me. I mean, think about it. A couple of years ago, Williams didn't score any points.
Yeah.
And they were going out of business. Do you remember when Claire left?
Yeah.
They were selling.
Yeah.
It was over.
Yep. And saved by, what's the company, American company that the investment firm?
Doralton Capital.
Yeah,
Doralton.
Yep. And the other thing that stands out.
What a wise move. How about that for a wise move?
Yeah. No kidding.
Think about that.
That investment, the guy who brought that one to the company is got a corner office now. The quote, not a quote, but by the way, on that fastest lap, they did admit they were running higher engine modes and low fuel. Just to reiterate what you said once again, Bob, testing means nothing, right?
Yeah.
So the car did look impressive.
Yeah, it's time to impress the sponsors.
Oh,
yeah.
Austin Dillon's gone to the beach.
How many laps to go? But Austin Dillon, yeah, he's.
It's only
what
the
turn
fourth,
is that? I can't tell.
It's only the 4th caution.
You're kidding. Wow.
That's pretty clean.
That's
race.
pretty amazing. 17
Plenty
to go.
of runoff at
There's
Coda.
SVG.
Yeah, I guess that does make sense, but still, it's NASCAR. I would expect more than 4. I don't know. I don't watch enough NASCAR, I guess. Red Bull is next.
Speaking
on
of
this
Williams, I think it's
go ahead.
probably significant that Carlos Sainz did a 129.3 on the C3 Pirelli tire.
That's interesting.
Yep. What would we say? 3rd from the hardest.
Yeah.
Alexander Albon was further down the list. He did a 129.6 on the last day, but he was on a softer C4 tire.
Hey, do you have?
So it looks like Sainz has really grabbed the reins at Williams.
Oh, that
no
impact
question. I really do think that's a fascinating pairing because we all know Albon. We've spoken to him a bunch of times. We all know Carlos. Two really, two nicer guys you wouldn't want out to take to dinner. They'd be delightful company, and yet they are in their own way very determined. And
it wouldn't be where they are.
And Albon, to me, actually, is I knew his dad really well because he used to race in Asia, so I have always kept an eye on Albon, but I never thought he would make it. I just thought he was too nice, too Thai for Formula One, and he's proved me wrong brilliantly.
Yeah. And when the last time that we sat down in a long form interview with him was at COTA, right after he was demoted from Red Bull. Remember?
That's right. Yeah.
And he was not
crestfallen, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. His confidence was, rightfully so. It was destroyed at the time. He just gotten ground up and spit out by the Red Bull driver machine. The next, speaking of Red Bull, that's who the race ranked as their next team, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4th from the best in testing. Their assessment appears to be struggling with the same problems as last year's car. And Max, that's right. I knew Max had a spin, had an uncharacteristic spin, and he said Max's quote was, "Not bad, but we still got a lot of work to do." And the technical director, Pierre Vache, said the car's going in the right direction, but more slowly than expected. So for all you conspiracy theorists, then what was it? Red Bull is in trouble, big trouble.
Yeah, it's a great headline, but
but here's something that the race pointed out was they were still running FlowViz in the last 2 hours.
Yeah,
of the whole 3 days of testing. That'll tell you something.
There is
maybe
a mindset shift, let alone physically and cost cap, whatever you want to call it. But there is when you've got a big change like 26, the mind shift is there. You're thinking about how can I put this onto the car that will be relevant next year. There was quite a lot of discussion in the tech talk about, they've moved, the cooling system here. And that's probably because they're thinking, towards 26.
That's brilliant.
And so my point is you're going to see innovations, but there might be things that come on the car and go, right, we've given that a go, that worked, but that didn't. Let's take it back off because it's actually not working yet, but let's develop that for the 26 car. So I think there's, like I said, there's a mind movement where you're constantly thinking 8 months ahead. Luckily, Newey, who's really probably had nothing to do with the Aston Martin this year, comes in afresh next week at Melbourne and can judge this year's car with a view to going back to his literally drawing board and and penning. I think that's what they'll have him do. I would be amazed if he was at every race. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I mean, he said as much. He said this first year, what will happen will happen. I need to get to know the team. And he comes on March 4th, as you say. That's the day after tomorrow. And, he says he still needs to meet everybody. He needs to understand what everybody's strengths and weaknesses are, and see what they've got for a race car right now before they can start making changes. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch Aston Martin from that perspective. And it's going to be interesting to watch Red Bull. We haven't had Adrian here for a while, but this is going to be our first season with a car that he really had very little to do with. And then there's the 06 to 26 car, which he's had nothing to do with. How are we going to do it without Adrian? That's going to be interesting to watch, I think.
All right, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to give you the last 3 teams in the order that their performance during testing. Back after these messages.
Thing in the running order.
Let's see.
No, because I'm looking at the 361. I don't really want to because I don't.
No, but it's one of the top headlines on the-race.com. The-race. Oh, come on, get rid of the cookie bot. God, you had to take 3 clicks just to get through it. Did you find it? I'll put it in the chat if you want. But all right, who we got on YouTube? Andy P's there. Andy P had some good thoughts. He said, let's
Is it
see.
F1 testing winner?
Oh yeah, Lewis Hamilton Time magazine cover. Man, I didn't put that in my show notes. Thank you, Andy. That was such a good story.
He bumped off Don?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
We can only hope.
Andy
Yeah,
P
we
says,
can. He won't be happy about that.
He says, all right, we're coming back. Thanks, Andy.
Hi, this is Jay Leno from JayLenosGarage.com, and you're listening to Speed City.
Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
All right, we're down to the last 3 teams. We're going grading their testing according to the race.com and their team. And the next they put in third as far as their performance testing was Ferrari. And the quote from Charles Leclerc said, "More unknown than compared to the last few years." That's a little bit negative and a little ominous. And their Friday, the last day of testing got cut short due to an unknown technical issue. Did you ever hear what that was?
Mm-mm.
And they kind of rated him as a downbeat vibe. But, there's high expectations, right? So unless they're having a great testing, there's probably going to be a downbeat vibe. So
Yeah. No, you're right. I'm with you.
And next on their list, Mercedes as the second best testing. And they said, George Russell says, "We had 3 seamless days and the car is running well." That's pretty
good.
Freaking positive. And they brought up the idea of, remember how cold weather or really,
Yeah.
it was more like
Lower
hot weather
temperatures.
was a negative for Mercedes. But remember, they did everywhere that it was cool, including Vegas, I think, if I'm remembering correctly.
Well, they won at Vegas, though.
Yeah, that's right. They
First
did.
and second.
That's right. I knew they did good. Sorry, thank you. And then also,
I was there.
They said,
Oh, wait,
yeah,
so were you?
they said
Oh, wait, Bob was as well.
this was their most encouraging preseason test in the ground defects era. So, and of course,
Yeah, let's face it, that's the real, bugbear for Mercedes the last few years is that they never really, they got the engine right a few years ago and dominated, and then this new
got it all wrong.
Yeah, low downforce, and
They had
has
porpoising longer than anybody, I
yeah,
think.
They've suffered more than perhaps any other team.
Yeah. And then best test award goes to McLaren. Consensus across the paddock that everybody's saying McLaren is not only had the best test, but that they're favorite right now.
In my humble, I think that the top three in the championship finished last year were probably, in my mind, going to be the top three teams to watch in Australia.
In constructor? Well, I guess.
Well, just in Australia. And then, and I think I'll be interested to see where Williams, if they can continue what they did in testing, joins the middle, the top of the middle pack.
Yeah.
One of the ongoing stories this year is going to be, what about your 2026 car? We've talked about that before. Teams that are doing well early in the season, this season, have to make a decision. Do we keep developing this car and try to score a championship or as much prize money as we can? Or do we abandon 2025 and devote all our resources under the spending cap to 2026? And that's going to be the unspoken concern the entire time is, what are you going to do with 2026 in mind?
Yeah. All right, we're going to jump. Hey, we need to jump to IndyCar. We're keep us on track here. We've got a lot of good stuff to talk about with IndyCar today because my, first of all, overall assessment is this was a really solid start, if not great start for Indy for this year because they had a great race. The broadcast was all new people and it went really well. I thought, just personally, I know that's a very subjective thing. The race, I think that's clearly a great start for the season. You guys agree?
Yes, I do. And well, you say it's all new people. I mean, they stuck with Hinch and they stuck with Townsend.
I say all new.
Yeah, I think
reporters.
I think Will Buxton's a good ad. I wasn't sure how he'd come across, but when he's in commentary mode, which is the role that they've got him playing, I think his energy is great. It's very Fox, and I'm sure Bob will back me up on that. But they they wanted something new and different. We've proved with Lee Diffie it doesn't matter about the accent per se. I think he's gelled well with both Townsend and Hinch, but he's been working with them anyway.
Yeah,
and he knows his stuff. I was watching him. He does know his stuff, and he also brings new stuff to it with Prima coming in, with Marcus Ericsson and people like that. These are guys that he knows really well.
He only made one error that I heard, and I want to hear Bob's take. It was funny. He said, "And these cars only have 18.5 liters instead of gallons." That's just, I'm just giving him a hard time because I agree with you. I think he did a great job. What about you, Bob? What about the whole weekend and everything?
Yeah, no question. These guys have rehearsed and practiced, and they know each other well by now. But keep in mind, this was an entirely new television production under Pam Miller, who was the producer. You had new people in new places, and everybody getting used to it. I saw some glitches. And more often than not more often than not, but occasionally the announcers would be talking about something that the video did not pick up on. So, which is kind of plenty of blame to go around when you're not talking about what's on the screen and the director's not following what you're talking about. They had a great race to talk about. It turned out really well.
Yep.
And I think they did a good job. And one of the things I really think benefited IndyCar was at the top where they took that NBC football style opening when all the drivers introduced themselves. So there's no question about how they pronounce some of these names.
Yeah.
Like, Rennes VK, and where they're from.
Yeah.
And as often as you heard Florida, California, all the obvious places, you heard the Netherlands, you heard Spain, you heard all of these different countries these drivers come from. And I think that was a nice touch.
I like that. I noticed that too, Bob.
Look, we all know India has needed a facelift. It has floundered with the uprise of Formula One. And not for any massive reasons. There's also been some changes at the top. But Doug Bowles is now playing a bigger role. They got rid of Fry. Yeah. And I do think Jay Fry. I think the international. So the three things that I think are really important for Indies going forward is they've got one channel now, because unfortunately NBC, in that transition from the NBC Sports channel, then on USA, and then
Peacock.
on Peacock. It just was everywhere.
Mhm.
Now, if you want to watch Indy Lights and Indy Next and Indy, it's on Fox 1 or Fox 2, and the replays I checked today are on the app. So,
Huh.
you've got full coverage, one home, great place. Secondly, what Bob just talked about, which you can't really plan, but the internationalism is there. You've got a real world view on motor racing of guys that are capable of being in Formula One, like a Colton Herta, or just on the edges like Marcus Ericsson or Marcus Armstrong. Great talent.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, I think that they've hit the ground running, realizing that they've got a bit of an image issue, and the promos and the money they've put into those. I mean, it was a dream come true for the guys that did the promos, because they had one on Pato who recovered to sixth. And then the top three guys, the greatest of all time was second. Ganassi up at front with Pillow. I mean, it doesn't get, and then Newgarden just getting a fuel problem at the end. So all the stars were where they needed to be.
All right. Well, we're going to jump again, and I apologize. We didn't get to spend as much time on IndyCar as we all wanted, but Bob got to do a really very, very fascinating interview. Bob, why don't you set up this clip real quick?
Well, sure. Michael E. Sawyer is an academic department head at the University of Pittsburgh in English and African American literature and culture. He is a lifelong, at least as he says, his adult life, Formula One fan, knows it inside and out, and has written a new definitive biography of Lewis Hamilton called Sir Lewis. It's a broad-ranging study of everything and his impact on Formula One, history of Formula One, what these cars are like, but it's written in an everyman style that makes it very easy to digest. I really enjoyed it, and so I was happy to talk to him about the book. And here's a sampling of our conversation. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks a lot, Bob. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the book.
I understand from the materials that came with the book that you are a lifelong Formula One fan. Is that true?
Pretty much lifelong, adult lifelong. So I was in the Navy before I joined academia. I was first stationed in Naples, Italy in 1990. So I made it up to the Italian Grand Prix in 1990. So I've been attending Formula One races since, that one. So that was a really eye-opening experience for me.
I noticed that the book took something like 5.5 years to write. I guess what was interesting to me is Lewis is now, with all that he's accomplished, approaching the end of his career. Why write the book now? Why not wait just a few more seasons until he hangs up his helmet?
Yeah, I think a couple of reasons. First off, when we really got to it, it was kind of post the 2021 season. And I think that was really a kind of tipping point for his career. In some ways, I was surprised that I would not have been surprised if he didn't come back after that, after what had happened at Abu Dhabi, frankly. And also, kind of fortuitously, depending upon how you look at it, it kind of, with the book coming out now, it kind of bookends his long relationship with Mercedes, and then there's, it's kind of this new start. So, with Lewis Hamilton, you may want to wait until, he's 80 when he stops doing stuff. So there's really no point, because and it was a race against time, really, because it takes a long time to get books into production. And we were just fortunate enough that the announcement with respect to leaving for Ferrari happened, because then the book would have, not had that kind of terminus to know that something new was happening right after this. So that's the reason why. And I think it's an opportune time to kind of think about this portion of his career, then situate ourselves to absorb that and be able to think about what's coming next as well. So,
with all that's been written and said about Lewis in this long and incredibly accomplished career, what made you decide to write a biography to add to that lexicon about Lewis?
So some of this comes from my kind of background, as you mentioned, as a professor who works on cultural studies. So the kind of biographical information is, there are all kinds of people, I think, who are well equipped to kind of handle that, he was here, he was there, this happened, that happened. What I really want to think about in the book is a series of kind of cultural, Lewis himself as a cultural phenomenon, and then think about the kind of long-term effects of him as an athlete who's an activist in multiple ways, right? The environment, social justice, diversity, whether it's gender, sexuality, race, et cetera. And also to think about Lewis in the long durée of athletes who have broken boundaries, right? So in that, I'm thinking about Jesse Owens in certain kinds of ways. I'm obviously thinking about Tiger Woods, who changed golf in certain ways. So I think that was in many ways the motivation to take a look at Lewis from a different perspective that I think exceeds the kind of biographical, because then I'm really concerned about, what Lewis thinks he's doing and then the way the world kind of perceives it and what happens kind of surrounding that, right? So if we think about what happened in 2020 when he had protested against police violence, that was part of a larger cultural milieu that I think can get lost if we only focus on what's happening with him in the four corners of kind of Formula One racing.
Talk a little bit about the impact of Anthony Hamilton in Lewis's life, including the fact that at the point Lewis decided to make his own decisions about his career, Anthony seemed to be perfectly willing to step away.
Yeah, I think part of the story here, and also this gets to where we started, is the reason to write the book is there's an important story about fatherhood and parenting that is here too, right? And I think it extends beyond. And I think what's interesting about Lewis's relationship, the way I understand it with his dad, is he always wanted it to extend beyond what they were doing in racing, right? And he always wanted to have. He mentions that these moments where you were just my dad and not these other things. So I think there's a point where any parent has to be able to let to let everything that they told their child be what the child does when they can't be around to kind of affect it, right? I think for Lewis, that played itself out in very public fashion, because I think, and I make this argument in the book, that Anthony comes from a very particular generation of Black migrants from the Caribbean, the Windrush. Windrush is kind of post-World War II, who show up in Britain. And he understands a particular way to kind of go about your business, right? There's going to be racism. There's going to be, problems with respect to bigotry, but you do a good job and therefore things will work out for you, right? I think he has Lewis buys into that for a period of time. He does everything he's supposed to. 2007 has the season that we all know he had in his first year. Then he gets to testing in Barcelona in 2008 and experiences like this kind of the most kinetic kind of racist practices you could possibly see, right? I think the kind of silence on the silent approach to just doing your business, he realized at that point was not going to be good enough for him as an individual. So I think it's not I don't view it as a break with his dad. I think it's an evolution from his dad's position as to how to go about dealing with these kinds of difficult situations. I think over the years, when you get to kind of 2019 and 2020, Lewis really develops a voice. I think has a lot to do with, again, his kind of international presence in places and spaces where, Formula One drivers are very focused people, right? And Lewis finds time to do a lot of other things. I think that contributed to that too. So when his dad walked away, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. I'm not ever sure that Lewis actually ever hired his dad as a manager. He just was his manager, right? And his dad at the same time, right? There was no interviewing process. It didn't seem to be kind of any coherent business agreement because it really wasn't necessary, right? It was just a relationship between a parent and a child. And there had to be some progress from that. And I think it was, and obviously I don't have to think it, says it was a very difficult time when they had that break, because this is where things kind of played out for them in the world of racing, was where they experienced both the professional relationship and their personal relationship. For that break to happen, I think was significant. But then when you see these kind of most important moments, like last year at Silverstone, or in 2021 in the final race, his dad is always right there, right? So I think that they figured out how to manage that relationship between the two of them. And I think in many ways, Tiger Woods' dad, some of the stories about the way Tiger Woods' dad trained Tiger are difficult to imagine, right? And I mentioned in the book too, right? In entertainment, you see the same thing with Joe Jackson and his sons, right? This kind of complicated relationship. I think that in many ways, Anthony Hamilton exemplifies the best of those ways of managing this, because it can be very complicated and it's probably not going to work, right? It's like, the chances of this coming off the way it did are basically zero, right? And somehow they catch this talent and the opportunity and all these kinds of things at the same time.
Mhm.
And his dad's drive, and I think it paid off in ways that we all benefit from. But I think it's also an example for any parent who has a child that dreams about anything, whether it's playing an instrument or being a really good math teacher. I think it's the same. Much of that is the same, to kind of explore those the lines between parenting and professionalism. I think are important to navigate.
Let's talk about life on the track. As we speak, preseason testing for 2025 is going on in Bahrain. Lewis is right there in his new Ferrari seat, fastest of all, I think, on day 2 of the testing. Are you willing to predict that Lewis will win races and further championships at Ferrari?
Yeah, I would like to predict that. I try to separate myself from being a fan of Lewis's. And to your point, right, he was, I think, fascinating. Like Carlos Sainz ended up like, I think, 3/100 second in the second session faster, but he's right there. And I think as he familiarizes himself with the car, and I think his relationship with Frederic Vasseur is important here, right? Because they've been, the kind of long relationship they have and the trust that's important. So I think much of the growing pains and leaving, a lifetime of Mercedes-powered drives to go to Ferrari, which has to be very different. I think that trust was important, and I think at the age that he is now, and this is the race that any athlete has, is you try to race between it's a foot race between everything that you know about the sport and everything that you can produce in the sport, right? So there's this sweet spot where if Lewis knew back in 2007 what he knows in 2025, he'd be a much different, we'd have much different results, but that's not how the world works, right? So I think there's a very small window, and I'm excited and also gratified by what I've seen just with his reception at Ferrari, and also the results that we've seen on the track where they seem to have their act together. So then, it comes down to being able to put races together, right? Because at this point, you've got 3 drivers out there who've actually won world championships, and Fernando Alonso's far away from that possibility. I think obviously Max Verstappen, we'll have to see what Max does with a car that doesn't seem to be in superior position this year like it has been in the past couple of years. But then you have a bunch of drivers who've won races but haven't been able to string enough of them together or a season together to do what Lewis figured out how to do almost his first year, and we know that he can produce that type of result. So I think much of it will come down to the slog of a season, right? And can he push the sun back up in the sky one more time or 2 more times and be able to pull this off with the car that gives him that possibility. So I'm excited about it.
Michael, I want to thank you for your time. The book is called Sir Lewis. It's published by Legacy Lit. It goes on the bookstore shelves March 4th, if I'm right.
Absolutely.
And I highly recommend it. Thanks once again, Michael.
Thanks a lot, Bob. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Excellent job, Bob.
Excellent. Yeah, brilliant.
All right,
Brilliant
we're going to
stuff.
go straight into another interview that I got up super early this morning, 6:30, and sat down with
Thanks for not calling me.
MotoGP journalist Simon Patterson, and he gave us a rundown of today's race and the first of the season. Let's hear from Simon Patterson. All right, we're very excited to welcome to the show Simon Patterson with the race, and he is going to get us all caught up after the first race of MotoGP for 2025. Simon, welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, John. Pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you for for connecting to us all the way from Thailand, and I know it's the evening after the race there, but wow, major headline: Marquez jumping out with an amazing start to his season here with the Ducati team.
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, it's kind of exactly what we expected because, I mean, he's Marc Marquez, right? He's one of the greatest of all time. We know how fast he is. He kind of showed us last year that, towards the end of the year with some strong performances, that he was coming back into stride after that long, long period of injury. It's been, believe it or not, it's been 1,900 days since he last led the MotoGP championship, from when he won it in Valencia in 2019 until he took victory in the sprint race on Saturday with those 12 championship points to put him back on top of the standings. So it's been a massive amount of time, a long road back to this. But he moved to the factory Ducati team for this season. He's looked super strong all the way through our preseason testing, including here at the Buriram circuit. So we kind of came into this weekend knowing that this was probably going to be his weekend to kind of show off a little bit to show us what he can do, to remind us of what he can do, and he absolutely did that. We thought he would maybe try and lead start to finish in the race. He didn't, as it turns out, because he was aware that he needed to kind of keep an eye on his tire pressure and make sure that his front tire pressure didn't dip so low that he'd get a penalty for it. So he let his brother Alex lead the race for most of it, sat behind him until 3 laps to go, and then said, sorry, little bro, this is mine, and just kind of passed him and disappeared off into the distance to take the win.
Yeah, I woke up and I was checking online, and that was the first thing I saw, and I was like, wait, it said Marquez is slowing down to let Marquez pass, and I was like, oh, that's awesome. That's amazing. Yeah, I've been watching Marc Marquez since he came on the scene right here in Austin, and really, this is, you guys were expecting it, but for us casual fans and seeing him, not doing as well in his last few seasons, this is a huge deal, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's great for the sport. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this over the course of the last kind of 6 months. Whenever we saw what was going to happen, whenever we could read the writing on the wall and saw that Marc Marquez was on his way back to being Marc Marquez, and I can't think of a greater comeback story in motorsport since Niki Lauda won his championship after the horrific accident that he had in the 70s. This is a guy who was told that he could lose his arm because of the kind of the series of injuries he sustained from July 2020 onwards, the extra surgeries, the complications. I mean, at one point he had to fly to Cleveland to the Mayo Clinic to have them break his arm again because it had healed at a 30-degree angle wrong. He's been to hell and back. It's awesome to see the start of this comeback story now. This first win, him back in championship contention, and just looking like the old Marc Marquez again, who's able to play with his rivals and just decide, oh, you can lead for a little bit. I'm still going to win this.
That is an amazing story, and watching Marquez back in the day when he was in his prime, he was just amazing, and the control that he had on the bike, where he would just look like he was halfway through a crash and just somehow save it and make it all look so casual. And I'm super excited to see what he's been going to do this season. But that wasn't the only thing that went on during this race. There's some other stories, weren't there?
Yeah, I mean, the other big story, with the absence, we should say, of reigning world champion Jorge Martin, who crashed in testing and then crashed again, training to come back this week, and it's really quite complex injury to his left wrist that's going to see him out of contention for quite a while. The first time we've noted the world champion start the season since Freddie Spencer, I think, in the mid-'80s. So that's kind of changed the dynamic of this weekend a little bit, and it meant that the other big story was two-time world champion and Marc Marquez's teammate, Pecco Bagnaia, who was kind of forced to settle for third place behind Marc and his brother Alex in both races. But I think things aren't as doom and gloom for Bagnaia maybe as they look, because he knew coming into this weekend that this is not particularly a circuit that suits his style. The next few races won't be, especially the Circuit of the Americas, which is Marc Marquez country, as we know. No one's going to beat him there if he's on form like this. But, everything else is looking pretty good for Bagnaia. Once we get back into Europe, once we get to those old school, fast flowing circuits that he goes so well at, to hopefully give us a bit of a championship show and not let Marc completely run away with everything this year.
Wow. Well, yeah, as you mentioned, Circuit of the Americas, we're just a few weeks away, and I can't tell you how excited we are for that. Hoping to get you in the booths for some of that. And, Austin really, there's already people talking about it here, so I can't wait for that. But what else from this weekend? Anything, other stories you want to touch on?
I mean, I guess the other thing we have to talk about is the only American in Grand Prix racing at the minute, isn't it? Joe Roberts, who's unfortunately really, really struggled this weekend. Finished today's race in the middleweight class in Moto 2, all the way back in P18. Largely because really he's still struggling from the injuries he sustained way back in the middle of last season. He had a big crash in the middle of the year. He really badly damaged his shoulder, and while he's kind of back to full fitness now, or back to full recovery, I should say, he's not fit. He's only been able to jump back in a motorcycle like 4 weeks ago. So physically he's limited. He doesn't have the strength, the muscle density that he needs. And like this weekend was, some of these guys have described this weekend as the toughest weekend they've ever sat in a motorcycle. We were well over 100 degrees ambient air temperature for the race today. It was insane. So to come into that with any sort of a kind of a weakness in your physical preparation, you were going to pay the price for it. And I think that's what we saw from Joe today. Hopefully, by the time we get to Texas in his home race, he'll be a little bit closer to the front and we'll see a little bit more success from him again.
Well, we're thinking about maybe even by this time you might see Joe in MotoGP with the momentum, the directions that he was going and winning races, but that is a bummer that he's had that injury, and of course we're going to try to keep an eye on him. But by the way, hopefully by the time Joe and all you guys get to Austin, it won't be 100 degrees in Texas like it can be. But yeah, that's something to watch for Joe. But well, Simon, I know that you've got a lot of things to do, and we just wanted to get an update. We're going to try to do this all season long with you, and we really appreciate it. And of course, we'll see you in just a few weeks here in Austin.
Won't be long until we're landing there. Can't wait for it. I think one of the MotoGP paddock's favorite races of the entire season. So everyone is looking forward to getting to Austin already.
Well, that's good to hear. All right, Simon Patterson, thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
All right, we covered Formula One, IndyCar, MotoGP, and we did not get to WEC. But
Ferrari, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. All right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. By the way, Wheel to Wheel, Chris Medlin and I, our first show of the year starts this Wednesday. Go to our website, speedcitybroadcast.com, to find out how to listen to that. And thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next Sunday night.
Happy trails.